All right. Happy holidays, everyone. And today we have our monthly check in with my friend Paco Nathan, founder of Derwin, a boutique consultancy focused on data and AI. And more importantly, he is also principal developer relations engineer at Sensing, where he works on graph AI and graph intelligence. So, Paco, welcome to our monthly check in.
Thank you, Ben. Very glad to be here. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so let me kick off. My first topic is a big kind of macro topic, which is around semiconductor export control. So this is
Yeah.
around the I guess the rivalry between China and the West, mainly the U.S. As many of you who listen to this podcast regularly have heard me say, the AI is a two-horse race between the U.S. and China. And think of AI as having three elements. In order to really excel in AI, you need these three. So data, models, and compute, which is basically chips and semiconductors. So uh, obviously, China has a lot of data. They have 1.4 billion people. Models, as Paco and I have discussed regularly in this podcast, are becoming increasingly somewhat commoditized. So models, there's a lot of models, but there's not a lot of differentiation. Obviously, we're excited about the continued progress in models, but it seems like, and Paco and I have discussed this on this podcast, even with these export controls, the Chinese are able to produce relatively decent models, right? So I wouldn't call them the
Yeah.
top shelf, but I mean, right there with Llama, let's put it that way. Now, but when it comes to chips and semiconductors, that seems to be a much more serious moat that the West has, right? So, because that involves decades of experience and hundreds of billions of dollars in investments, right? So you can think of if AI is such a fundamental technology that can be used for military purposes, maybe there is a reason why you might want to have or at least if you're in the U.S. shoes, you may want to make sure that you're ahead in the battle for AI. So then, which then brings us to the question of then what do you do, right? So then you have a few strategies. The first strategy is to do nothing, right? So no export controls, but that's not tenable given what happened in the solar panel industry and electric vehicles, where the West shared a lot of the technology with China, and obviously now, now China owns those markets globally, right? So if you do that in AI, one argument would be, well, I mean, AI has much more serious applications than solar panels and electric vehicles, including batteries, right? So the second approach is to go all in, which is full country export bans, right? So regardless of what you are, if you're in a specific country, export ban. So there's an argument to be made for both of those extremes, right? But the reality is that the Biden administration has kind of adopted much more of the middle approach, which is to let's thread the needle, right? So let's have smart export controls where we ban certain semiconductors, certain equipment and software for making semiconductors, and hope that that works, right? So, and we're recording this a few days after the Biden administration on their way out, before the Trump people inherit this policy, instituted a new set of export controls. Basically, and I have links in the episode notes. So basically, think of it as expanding more into high bandwidth memory, right? So they now have very much more broadened the types of high bandwidth memory chips that they're including on this list. And as some of you may know, high bandwidth memory is so critical for AI, right? So I mean, all these chip manufacturers, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, I mean, part of that of their chip package includes high bandwidth memory, and so the Biden administration has expanded into much more of the high types of high bandwidth memory that you really need for AI. And then they also included more chip making tools. And then they also expanded to the list of entities that are covered. So entities in China that are covered by these export controls. So now, once you have these in place, you might think, well, okay, so then that's it. We're all set. We've banned the actual chips. We've banned high bandwidth memory. We have a list of entities that we're banning. But then, this threading the needle approach requires coordination with your partners, right? Specifically, in this case, the Netherlands, because of ASML, the manufacturer of that laser that you need for manufacturing chips, and Japan and Korea for memory chips. And so you need coordination with partners, but then you also, the way these bans work, you kind of announce it, and then you allow your partners to, get their act in order, right? So get their operations and logistics in order. And so in the meantime, obviously, the Chinese will stockpile because basically you pre-announce and then months later, by the time you implement, maybe they've stockpiled, I don't know how many months or years worth of supply, right? And then obviously because these are regulations that thread the needle, there are loopholes that can be threaded. So maybe you go to a different country, or maybe you list a company in a third country that domiciled in that country, but really, in disguise, right? So, and then obviously there's the companies in the West themselves who are constantly lobbying the Biden administration for exemptions and, or pleading, if you don't let us do this, we'll suffer, which is, not something that is believable at all in the case of NVIDIA, right? Because even if you ban China, there's so much demand for their chips that they have no problem selling their chips, right? So you can take China off the table; they'll sell their chips for the next 50 years, right? So
Yeah.
so anyway, so I just felt like this is an issue worth discussing, given that we have a new administration coming in the U.S. And also, for some reason, whenever I talk to friends about this issue, a lot of people are completely unaware about what's happening, right? So they just know that this is happening, but people don't seem to pay attention. But I believe, given, let's say, the unpredictability of the next administration, this will be something we will all feel next year. Because, they go from let's go tariffs, so maybe they will lift the export controls. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen next year, right? So, but the bottom line is pay attention, because this may impact how you actually are able to implement whatever AI plans you have in 2025 and beyond. So anyway, on to you, Paco.
Well, I just about that point, I also saw that China responded. There was some quid pro quo. So if I've got this right, China has just put in a
Rare
ban.
metals, right? So they
Yeah,
control the market for rare metals, which are essential building blocks for some of these chips. So yeah, so obviously they're not gonna sit on the sidelines and let this happen.
and it could become a negotiating point. I mean, if it comes down to it, these are basically horse trading points.
So Paco, I sketched out the three options, right? So do nothing, go full country ban, or thread the needle. So right
Yeah.
now we're threading the needle. So what's your personal take on? So it seems
I
like the do nothing is off the table, right? Given
yeah,
what
no,
happened to solar
there's no way.
industry and
Yeah,
EVs, right? So
yeah, there's no way, and there's no way a full ban will work. So I mean, it's going to have to be some flavor of thread the needle. I just think that
well, the
what's
full ban means, if you're a Chinese entity, you're banned from. So that's what it means. So it's implementation wise, arguably easier. Now, whether or not that's the right thing to do, I leave that to someone else. But I think as far as implementation, you just tell your partners, "Hey, full ban, full countrywide ban. This is," and then no more nuance, right? So no more loopholes, no more.
it,
Uh,
it's just that I mean, what we're already seeing in the early foreshadowing of the next administration, we're already seeing, pay to play deals come up where somebody who's very wealthy from another particular country that might have bans, makes a
or
$20
or
million
someone
donation.
someone who's very wealthy, who's a top advisor,
Right.
who's also in the electric vehicle industry, who has large interest in China, may want to soften this ban, right?
So I think that it'll end up looking like horse trading, but it'll be very chaotic and haphazard and benefiting probably the wrong people. So yeah, I think it's kind of a middle ground, but it's a very chaotic middle ground for the near term.
But the lead of the U.S. and the West is for real, right? So
Yeah,
it's not just this generation; it's the coming generations. It's the equipment to make the
yeah.
chips. It's the software to make the chips. Um,
I think models though, I think we're gonna, I don't know, unless something really earth-shaking happens, we're probably going to have this kind of reversion to the mean of more model parity. I could see that going forward.
I mean, so I think until further notice, until someone comes up with a breakthrough of some kind, uh, it's unclear whether or not the models themselves probably could still be distinguished by scale and
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and your ability to deploy them efficiently might also be somehow something you can distinguish. And then all of that is obviously impacted by your access to semiconductors, right? So there's a reason why Elon has pre-ordered the next generation of NVIDIA chips, and he's at the top of the line, right? So, I mean, so if and there's a reason why other companies want to be at the front of that line as well, right? So, uh,
Yeah.
so
How
it's
much do you
not,
have to pay to get to the front of the line
yeah,
now?
yeah, it's not something. So is if it didn't matter, they wouldn't do it, right? So,
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, all right. So on to your first topic.
So, my first is I think in a lot of ways related to this, or maybe it's an artifact that's emerging because of it. But some of the biggest news that happened over the past couple, 3 weeks, you may have seen, but there was an article in Reuters quoting Ilya Sutskever, from formerly from OpenAI, but one of the OpenAI founders, talking about how some aspects of pre-training had plateaued. And so, the idea there's been this notion of bigger is better, and that scaling laws will fix all problems. Certainly, that kind of rhetoric has come out of a couple companies based in San Francisco. But I think what we're seeing is very clearly, at least when it comes to text, that maybe the bigger is always better argument is starting to lose steam. We're seeing some diminishing returns, and I was really interested to see Julian Chamon from Hugging Face, commenting how this is good. This is something we would expect, and it does point toward perhaps more open models, being able to achieve better parity with the closed models. Of course, it's still a very haphazard, uneven landscape when it comes to what does an open model mean. But the idea that a couple of companies are just so dominant and they're going to get so much bigger and so much better, it doesn't necessarily hold anymore. And so now we're going to look maybe in smarter ways at how to improve. I thought that there were two things that came out. One, of course, was Ilya Sutskever's quote uh, about having plateaued. The other thing that came out was with Quen, which it's relatively open, let's say, and I can show a nice diagram
Yeah,
from Alan
Alibaba.
AI. Yeah,
Alibaba.
so the Quen model is really challenging Claude. And actually, if I share this right now, let me just so we'll have it on the video too. Oh, I don't have sharing. Um, but in any case, you get this kind of Pareto front where you can see
Now you do. Yeah.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I really like this. This is a illustration that came out of let's see, let me get full screen. It came out of Allen Institute, and you've got this kind of Pareto front here where you've got these different Olmo models, which they're doing their idea of an open model. But then you've also plotted that against benchmark performance, average performance for Llama 2, Llama 3, also Gemma and Quen. And you can see the kind of frontier that's going on there in terms of flops versus average performance on benchmarks. Uh, so there's seriously some relationships there, and I think that feeds into a lot of the arguments that you were talking about. Is that we'll probably continue to see more model development, more commodification of the models, and perhaps that opens up to a broader range of different suppliers. So ostensibly, we would be getting options to use models from not just one or two sources, but now from more. And I think to that point, this was really interesting because Hugging Face just published. You've got this tree chart here, this tree map showing from 2022 to 2024, what's the popularity of the models. And over in the top left, you've got the Meta Llama models, roughly account for about 20% of all downloads. Down here in the bottom left, you've got, it's it's like 7% ish of Google models. And then up here, you've got Microsoft. And that's all just for the NLP side, the text side. You've also got computer vision, multimodal, what's going on with audio, et cetera. But you see some pretty healthy representation there on different open models. So I think that kind of supports this trend of commodification.
And obviously, this only covers open models, right? Because if you actually look at revenue, the revenue for the commercial models is quite high. It's just that they can't make money on inference. Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I think that I'm not a the benchmarks are great, but they don't really, they can be gamed in some ways, right? So,
They're very
in other
problematic.
words, at the end of the day, when OpenAI releases a new model, or Claude, or Meta, or Alibaba, or Tencent, I mean, the only thing for you to do is try it. I mean, you should try it, right? So, and I don't know of any team that actually just uses one model. I think that's not a good strategy now. I mean, I think there's not a lot of differentiation between these models. I think that the commercial models are still better
Yeah.
or just off the shelf general purpose. And I think when we think of the scaling laws, uh, think of it more, if you're an AI team, think of the scaling laws and how these models are getting better more as as a signal for how you might benefit, because you might not actually use these models yourself because they're too big anyway for your use case. So you're going to
Right.
use a smaller model, but these smaller models benefit from these bigger models as well. Because basically, if there's some development in one of these bigger models, usually there's some manifestation that gets distilled to a smaller model,
Oh,
and then
yeah, that's a
and then
that's a good
and then
point.
you benefit, right? So
There's a kind of
so
back pressure for innovation.
I
Yeah.
think for us, fine. If you guys want to scale and you want to spend a lot of money scaling, if we're not investing in your company and you're burning all that cash, and in the meantime, all these learnings are getting mapped over to open models,
Yeah.
that's great for us, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and now, whether or not there's a slowdown, I believe probably that's the case until further notice in terms of. Honestly, most of the people working in these models talk to each other anyway, even if they work in different companies. So I think that unless there's some sort of breakthrough in terms of yeah, an architecture of some kind or some clever way of using data and compute, I think that we'll continue to make progress. So I think scaling still absolutely matters. If you're one of these companies, if you give up and say, okay, I'm not going to scale anymore, well, people are going to gravitate to other models that are investing in scaling. Because basically, the bet that the developers will make is, okay, this company is betting on scaling. I'll use their models, and then when they distill and shrink, the smaller models will be better anyway. So that's why these companies are kind of in this trap in some ways. They have to scale, otherwise the other companies are scaling, and and unless they can come up with some kind of fundamental uh, way of showing market improvement, which I haven't seen. I mean, I haven't seen. I mean, they all improve, but it's not like you can't swap models,
Right.
especially if you have access to all the commercial models, right?
Yeah.
So the open source models, I think, are still slightly behind, in my opinion, in terms of if you're going general purpose, right? So in other words,
Right.
if you're an AI team, you still don't know what you're building,
Yeah.
then you probably should try one of these commercial models first before you try the.
You'd
Because
benefit by using the
basically,
larger
the
ones. Yeah.
idea, as Paco would attest, it's almost like they become your benchmark, right? So if I can't do it with this one of these commercial models, it's unlikely I'll be able to do it with one of these open models, right? So obviously, we probably will deploy with the open models because we have more control. It might be cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So, but when we're building and testing around, that's why I think we benefit as these people invest in scaling, because basically that becomes our kind of benchmark ourselves for what's possible and what's not. The problem for us as developers and users is what these companies might run out of cash.
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Do
I
do
mean,
people keep throwing billions and billions in
I
new
mean, because
tranches at them?
basically, it's not a profitable model yet until they come up with some kind of application or some business model to sustain their efforts towards AGI or whatever you want to call it, right? So in other words, their quest to get better and better needs to be funded by something,
So
right?
so far, Microsoft and Amazon, respectively, happen to be very, very well-funded, deep-pocketed benefactors for these projects, and we'll see how long that goes on. But they do have a lot of money to put at the problem.
Which, by the way, Paco, this also ties into the Trump administration, right? So I assume Lena Khan is gone. So what does this mean in terms of
Right.
mergers and acquisitions? Can Amazon
Right.
buy Anthropic?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. Right. So, uh, and if
And,
they do, what does that mean? Let's say
and
thought experiment, right? So what if
yeah,
Amazon buys Anthropic? What does that mean?
I mean, it would be interesting.
Can it? Well,
Amazon,
you would have to use Amazon to run Anthropic, right?
yeah, I mean, Amazon's done acquisitions, obviously, but I don't know, bringing in another largish organization into a place like Amazon, I think
Well, I'm
is
just saying.
difficult,
So
but it'd
acquisition
be interesting.
M&A is
It makes sense.
might be
Yeah.
back, right? So
Yeah. And in this area, they have done some acquisitions, specifically in terms of like AI chip development. They've done some acquisitions. So yeah, definitely that could happen. And to your point, I mean, to be fair, the point about plateauing doesn't necessarily mean everything comes to a grinding halt. Certainly, this was just talking about pre-training on text. When you talk about multimodal aspects of models, there's a long way to go.
But
there's a lot of
by the way,
left of that.
I think we've had this discussion too, right? So
Yeah.
before, which is basically let's assume plateau that we have make no progress for the next 2 years. The models stay the same. My thesis is we still have so much on the applications and how to
Yeah. The
deploy.
use cases aren't
I mean,
explored.
there's so
The
much to
evals aren't developed.
we have years of work left to do in order to
Yeah. Yeah.
optimize and learn how to use these models well, right? So
Well, I mean, I think that was, Julian Chameau's comment there was that this is fairly good news. I think it's good news more for just perceptions in the market instead of saying, oh my God, everybody drop what you're doing. These models are just getting bigger and bigger and better and better. Instead, I think now we really have to step back and be smarter about understanding the use cases and understanding what can we do with the biggest closed model we can get, and then how can we back that out into something that's cost effective. I think people have to grapple with these kinds of engineering issues now, as opposed to just betting on a pony and seeing how far it'll go.
that's why I think I wrote a very short post about this a while back, which is why I think most companies should focus their tooling around post-training, right? So because basically the idea here is someone's going to do pre-training. We've got a lot of starter models to work with, but post-training is where you will distinguish yourself. And post-training can run the gamut. It could, mean fine-tuning, many types of fine-tuning, distillation, quantization, even RAG, if you want to consider it that way. But basically,
Yeah,
your
substrate, yeah.
infrastructure should focus on how do I take one of these models and squeeze the heck out of them, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also telling when you look at the companies that have a lot of experience more in that application area. I'm thinking of companies like Perplexity and U.com. Obviously, they make it very simple just to switch off between different models under the hood. So they're really driving toward this kind of mode where, whatever, pick a few different models, see what works for you. There's different price points. And I think others should probably be adopting that.
Yeah, and to our listeners, just so you know, whenever I have some task or something I need to do, I use 5 models. And then I either compare or even if it makes sense, if I don't mind the latency, I do ensemble.
Right.
But
Okay.
basically, why should I content myself with? I mean, that's why for us as people who are using and developing around these models, it's a great time because basically, yeah, you guys keep investing in getting better and better. We'll reap the benefits in applications, right?
I would still like to see better tooling about how to use different models. I think there's a long way to go there. We were talking about BAML last time. I think this is a really good direction, but I want to see, I think rather than
Yeah, I
seeing
mean,
more
you
emphasis
can
on more models,
you,
I'd like to
you can
better
use
engineering.
you can use Unify.
Oh,
Boom.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
give
You just
arbitrage.
yeah. 1 line of code. You're switching models, right? So.
Yeah.
All right. So my next topic is related to my first one, and it's 2 topics at once, which is manufacturing and Intel, right? So obviously, manufacturing specifically around semiconductors, big thing, right? So Biden administration had this thing, the CHIPS Act, and I think actually it's a good idea to for the Trump people to I think keep at it, right? So which is basically keep investing on domestic manufacturing. It might take several years to reap the benefits, but I think it's
Yeah.
something important, right? So
Yeah.
obviously there's challenges when doing that, right? So obviously you need the engineering talent, and I don't know, Paco. I think back in the day, hardware engineering was cool. It was a career, right? So I think that's kind of fallen by the wayside here in the US, especially, right?
I mean, there's a critical mass around San Jose, but it's
Eh,
the kind of thing where you can't just, like in software, you can walk down the street and get a better job that afternoon. In hardware, you can't do that, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
only a few
It's
people who will
hardware has
hire you.
become kind of like the equivalent of finance, which is it's could be a good career, but you have to live in a few places, New York, right, London,
Yeah,
Chicago, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
uh, And I don't know the amount of, like Paco said, the amount of options that you have, right?
But it gets interesting. I mean, for the right amount of money, would somebody move out of San Jose? And I don't know, is there a
In
fab
Arizona,
that's
to go
going
to
up in
Arizona, right? So
Tempe?
Arizona,
It kind of makes sense. I mean, you could get, I mean, the weather's not that great, but it's actually kind of a fun city, and you can buy a much bigger house. So I mean, I think we'll see some percolation.
and then obviously, manufacturing requires a supply chain and an ecosystem,
Yeah, that's a big thing.
which doesn't exist, right?
Well, I
So
mean, it's interesting.
we will need to rebuild.
Yeah, some of that can be scaled out. I mean, definitely you might spend $15 billion in a fab, but then there's all these other businesses that go around. And full disclosure, I used to work for one of those. Gosh, going almost 25 years ago, I was working for a company that was handling first silicon coming out of AMD, Motorola. And so, I mean, the big fabs don't do everything themselves, is what I'm trying to say. They hire up a lot of other companies as well. And so I think that's great because it's not just how much is being spent on the fabs. There's this multiple, and it'll then that also goes into like how many teachers are hired, how many pizza delivery people are hired, etc.
And obviously, you don't have to do everything onshore, despite what these America First people are telling you. I mean, you have the friendlies, right? So Japan, Korea, the Southeast Asian countries. I mean, they're part of the global ecosystem and supply chain for semiconductors.
Yeah.
Um,
It, it
obviously, the main element there is Taiwan, right? So, uh,
Yeah, well, I mean, Motorola kind of got tripped up over that in, I guess, the 90s because they would ship the chips from like one country to another, do a tiny little bit of work, ship to another country because there were really obscure tax breaks.
mhm.
And so they were highly optimizing that and just doing little bits and pieces in different countries. And I think it became too complex to really manage. To some extent, I think Intel got hit with that too. So yeah, I don't know. I
But
mean, that's a double-edged
I guess
sword.
my point there is, if it's too intimidating to do everything all at once,
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can.
there's a way to ease into it, right? So,
Yeah.
which brings me to Intel. We're having this conversation a few days after the CEO of Intel, quote unquote, retired. But I think he was asked to retire, or he was given a choice: retire or we axe you, right? So. And to a large extent, the CHIPS Act is Intel, right? So basically, right? So because Intel was the national champion of the U.S. for semiconductor manufacturing. So
And, and there are some obscure rules in place about how much percentage of the market Intel has to have. Right? I understood that there's some of that is codified in the law.
so the question there is what happens to the CHIPS Act now with the Trump administration coming in and also with the stepping back of the CEO, right? So what does this mean for Intel in general? Will the new CEO basically spin out the manufacturing arm, which is basically what AMD did back in the day, right? So
Yeah.
and but then you're back to square one. You're dependent on TSMC because
Yeah.
unless this manufacturing arm is there's a lot of commitment there because, like I said, it will take time, right? So it's not like you're going to manufacture cutting edge chips from day one. You're going to
Yeah.
start with slightly older chips, right? And then ease your way in, and then. But maybe maybe by spinning it out, it gives more confidence for your rivals like Nvidia and AMD to use your fab. I don't know, but supposedly there was going to be like a separation between you know the two parts of the company. At least there were guarantees that that was going to be the case, right? So, um, so we'll see. So it's these are important issues for AI in general to resolve because basically right now, AI, the AI race is really a race around chips, honestly. And so then where are the chips coming from right now? They're all coming, they seem to be coming from Taiwan. And uh, Taiwan, if you haven't visited Taiwan, I was just there. It's
That's
great.
right.
I think most people uh, who have interest in Asia should consider Taiwan. It's great. You get Chinese culture. You can get by with English, and it's great. You're supporting someone critical to AI. So that's my second topic, Paco. Manufacturing plus Intel. I don't know if you have any comments or you want to go on to your topic.
No, well, I'll follow up with something related. I'd like to kind of backfill. There's kind of a historical trend that you mentioned here, just about the importance of chips. And so I ran across something that's fairly recent. And so forgive me, mea culpa. This is a scientific paper, but it's from Charles Martin and Ganesh Mani. It's called The Recent Physics and Chemistry Nobel Prizes, AI, and Convergence of Knowledge Fields. And they're talking about this historical trace where they're seeing so much overlap between what's happening in chemistry, what's happening in physics, and how AI tooling is enabling breakthroughs. And certainly, that was represented in the Nobel Prizes this year, where you had Hopfield Networks. Full disclosure, I worked for John Hopfield for 1 week before the reorgs hit, and I got pulled back into a different part of Bell Labs. But there, when you trace the history of what happened, I think that this paper from Charles Martin, Ganesh Mani is really interesting because they talk about how, Jeff Hinton was active way back when, back in the 80s when I started going to IJCNN, and when Hopfield was working with some of his formulations. And the key thing that was missing was the hardware. And so once we really had the compute, then a lot of these ideas that had been percolating for a while, people like Hinton continued them on and pushed them. And it was the fact that we had this acceleration from hardware that really made for the breakthroughs in deep learning. So I think it's a really interesting part because it informs what we're talking about right now.
Jensen will say, you forgot about CUDA.
Sure, yeah. Well, it does help to have the software stack too. Let's definitely, but it does help to have some cost-effective hardware underneath that software stack.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's a little problematic because they're very glowing in techno optimism about cryptocurrency and AGI and all the rest. But it's a pretty good historical trace, and I think it really underscores this trajectory that you were just talking about the importance of chips and where does this lead next. And I think they make a pretty good point. I mean, the way they describe it is the authors are advocating to have AI-enabled polymaths bridge the gap between theoretical advancements and practical applications. And to that point, when you look at how, AlphaFold, how that rolled out, how much impact, I don't know that we even understand how much impact it has yet, but certainly significant impact of cutting down the time to go from, understanding of like structurally based drug discovery to actually getting some kind of improved pharmaceuticals. There are other companies like Iambic. I'm not an expert in this area, but it's interesting to see Iambic with, neural plexor models that are coming out that have continued to improve over what AlphaFold was doing. So there's improvement in cost, improvement in flexibility, and just what kind of hardware is required. So I think that this area of science getting enabled by AI has really demonstrated what can be done, and certainly we're seeing that recognized by the Nobel Prize, 2 Nobel Prizes this year, which are somewhat in category for that, and we'll likely see much more because there's definitely return on investment.
Yeah, the chemistry prize I thought was a no-brainer, but the physics one was, I don't know.
You kind of have to blur your eyes a little bit on the physics prize. I mean, I get. I mean, Hopfield was definitely working in physics. I mean, that's the thing that attracted me was the kind of physics math models that you would be using to do the energy optimizations for a network. And I mean, I do think that the wording of that prize is a little strange.
And the chemistry prize, no brainer, but I thought they should have given it to DeepMind instead of people.
Interesting. Yeah, team organization.
I'm sure the team was much deeper than the two people they gave it to.
I have heard some comments about this from people close to DeepMind, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna mum's the word. I'm not gonna cast any aspersions, but
Yeah.
yes, I agree. I think that would have been much more politic.
Yeah. All right. So my two quick hits are very different from each other, and I'll do one at a time and allow you to comment in between, right? First one is crypto, right? So, because now we have, again, the Trump administration coming in and basically complete deregulation of crypto, right? And crypto and Bitcoin in particular is one of these topics where everyone in tech who's not interested in Bitcoin and crypto think it's stupid and crap, right? But obviously, the thing has been around since 2010. So as a store of value, it seems like it's here to stay
Yeah.
as a store of value. The 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 question there is applications, and there's no applications as far as I can tell, right? So, I mean, I
Right.
guess the Ethereum and Solana have tried to have applications, but I don't know if any of the applications really require a decentralized ledger, right? So
Yeah,
if
the
you can
smart
get,
contract side is really
so
problematic.
if I think it's basically a technology looking for a solution still in my mind. And in fact, I asked some crypto centric folks in advance of this podcast, so what's the latest? What's really popping in
Interesting.
crypto? And
Yeah,
they
interesting.
all laughed, and the answer universally was meme coins. So anyway, so crypto. So quick response for you, and then I'll go to my next stop. Quick hit.
Oh man, I literally just can't even. That's my response on
Okay.
crypto. But
All right. My next quick topic is social media and Blue Sky in
oh,
particular.
great. Okay. Yeah.
So it seems like Blue Sky has emerged as the place with the critical mass post Twitter for people who are not happy with Twitter. I think a lot of people tried Mastodon. It seems too complicated. Threads has a lot of users, but it doesn't have the tech people or the newsy people that you want,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so then Blue Sky seems to have uh, this notion of, you have some control over your feed, right? That's a big thing. I think just having control about your feed, especially how your feed is laid out, and then blocking. That's also a big plus for people. And then finally, some notion of decentralization where you can kind of tie your handle to a domain, right? So,
Mhm.
so I I don't know that people have quite recovered from the experience of what happened to Twitter in the following sense, right? So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for about Blue Sky, and there's a lot to like there. But I think people are generally just wary of how much do I invest and trust in something if the rug can be pulled under me. So the attraction to Mastodon was the rug can never be pulled from you, but then
But
the user experience was never there, right?
yeah, no, I was actually going to mention Blue Sky as my next thing too. And I'll say that like my social network has been migrating over. Only 4% of what I had as a social network on Twitter is now on Blue Sky, but the engagement is higher. So I mean, there's a couple of communities I participate in, and
It
it's moved
seems
over.
it seems to have reverted, at least for now, to social, right? So in other words, it's not attack. It's engagement and social, right?
Right? Yeah. I mean,
The vibe is very social, right?
the tagline that I heard was, what happened on Twitter and to a large extent on LinkedIn is you don't really manipulate your feed. It manipulates you. I mean, that's the intent. And what I'm seeing on Blue Sky is that I can post. I've done a lot of experiments of posting comments across many different social networks platforms, and it's interesting because I'm getting the best engagement, like absolute amount of engagement out of Bluesky, even though the numbers of people are actually much lower. It's just the noise isn't there.
And then, like I said, user experience matters. So the user experience is very familiar to people.
I,
And the Mastodon seemed like it was a big lift for civilians,
yeah, you've
right?
you've got to invest in twiddling a lot to get Mastodon to work. I will say that when I've tried to do these bake-offs across different platforms, if I have a quirky question, something that's just going to have, you know, a few people are really interested in it, maybe not the masses are interested in it. I think Mastodon tends to attract more of that kind of quirkiness, and so I get actually better responses of Mastodon if it's something again a little bit out of the ordinary that I'm asking. So there's definitely communities over there, but just in general, posting the critical mass for like for instance, I've been really interested in a lot of like dark money, and a lot of those people have moved over. A lot of the reporting is now on Bluesky. Same thing with open source intelligence. There's a very healthy community over there, and frankly, more and more of the tech community is moving over as well.
Yeah,
So
and then the fact that there's a company that created a mobile app, right? So a lot of so for regular users, these things matter.
yeah, no, the mobile app is like using Twitter 10 years ago. I mean, it's actually a pretty nice app, and it doesn't really get your way. And the fact that you can leverage your own DNS if you have a domain, you
Yeah.
control that. You can effectively use that for your own verification, and you don't have to go pay somebody to get a blue check mark. It's just much more sane. It's much more the kind of ideas that were floating around a much earlier era of the internet.
Yeah, and then like I said, you have some you can choose what your feed looks like, and then if someone is uh, being unreasonable, you can block them, right? So
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. And you really, when you block somebody, you really block them, as opposed to Twitter, where it's sort of a soft block and then they back off of it. Um, one thing though about Bluesky, there's still a few bugs. Like
yeah,
if you've tried to create a starter pack, there's a few nuances. If you don't have a feed included in your starter pack, then you won't be able to complete it. There's some UX stuff that needs to get worked out, but in general, it's really good. If you do want to create a feed, you'll end up writing a little bit of code, but it's not that much, and there's a lot of boilerplate for that. So I think that you can really make things out of Bluesky.
yeah,
We
and it's a testament to how much you can build with a few people, right? So the company I think is like 10 to 20 people, but
yeah, it's really
they
small.
have like maybe they have outsourced content moderation to 100 or so people. But I
And
think at some point Twitter probably also got bloated a little bit, right? So
yeah,
um,
quite.
but now when you have a chance to redo things from scratch, maybe you can do it more thoughtfully and carefully. But it remains to be seen. It's a company.
Yeah, a company
Someone,
led by two women who are executives, the
yeah,
top two executives of the company.
yeah,
I think we should probably mention what happened with the data set on Hugging Face, because over the weekend, what happened was, Blue Sky makes it really easy to pull uh, data if you want to go
yeah.
and I don't know, train some machine learning algorithms. And since that's open to the public, somebody had pulled a large data set, and one of the more popular repositories for open data sets is on Hugging Face. So Hugging Face Librarian had done that, and then there was this enormous backlash, which I found somewhat appalling and awkward, because I know the person who had done this, and it was all done in good faith, and it appeared to be done according to licensing. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong, but just culturally, the norm on Blue Sky was like, hey, don't mess with this way. We don't want this, and so the data set was taken
Yeah,
down.
yeah, that's always been one of my questions, right? So, because basically they say we're not going to use your data to train AI algorithms or AI models, but then
Somebody else could.
we're not going to guard your data either, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I mean, we're definitely seeing there's a few glitches that need to be worked out in terms of policy, probably, but overall, they get high marks, and this really is just such a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I
Uh,
like that it came out of Twitter, but then I'm also worried that it's a company that, someone can snap up. And so that's why I think generally people are wary in terms of, just don't, the thing about social media, don't get attached.
yeah, sure. You never know. We might
You know,
all end up
the
on
the
Reddit.
the main solution to our problems, honestly, is just some sort of RSS where we can talk to each other, and we all own each other. So,
UCP.
all own. We all own our own presence somehow, but somehow some way of connecting that will allow us to.
We'll roll it back to FidoNet. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
so,
uh,
do you have anything else, or do we go to recommendations?
yeah, no, I've got a rapid fire. So the first one is just a couple of novel inventions. I think people are finding interesting ways to leverage what's been going on with large language models and large models in general. The first one I love is we can link to a YouTube that shows this. It comes out of U Washington, but the idea is they have a cone of silence. So if you're talking with somebody, you have noise canceling headphones on. The idea is to use machine learning to develop a kind of virtual perimeter so that you and the person you're talking with, even if you're in a busy place, are in a sound bubble. And so any proximate sounds like between you are amplified, everything else is canceled. And if you have the experience of working in coffee houses or meeting in restaurants, this is going to be a game changer. So I love that it also has the Get Smart callback. I'm definitely showing my age, but uh, there was a TV series called Get Smart back in the 70s, and they had a famous thing called cone of silence.
Oh,
So
yeah,
now we
yeah.
can finally use AI to get our cone of silence. And along these lines too, O2, which is a telecom in UK, O2 came out with something called the AI Granny. I don't know if you've seen this, but they have this bot. Basically, they have such a problem trying to regulate the spam calls, of course, that everybody gets. Instead, what they do now is just put a bot in there to talk with them, and it sounds like an elderly person who's going to be very gullible and go along with the scam. So the idea is they've been able to keep fraudsters on calls for up to 40 minutes at a time by fooling them and basically playing their using their game, turning the playbook back on them. So I thought that those are a couple of really interesting uh, use cases where, like we were saying, I think there's a long road ahead in terms of understanding the applications and the last mile and the UX. And I think both these really kind of illustrate a lot of creativity in those aspects.
Very cool. All right. Recommendations. I'll go with two books, two biographies, because I find that these are good distractions over the holidays and also with the political turmoil, just escape to to different eras. The first one is got released uh, just recently. It's about Roger Penrose. It's called The Impossible Man, Roger Penrose and the Cost of Genius. If you folks are not aware, Roger Penrose, famous physicist and mathematician, did some work with on black holes with Stephen Hawking, among other things, but Penrose styles and so on. The second book is older, but if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a great read, a great way to escape over the holidays. It's called A Mind at Play: How Claude Shannon Invented the Information Age. So Claude
Interesting.
Shannon, as Paco mentioned, Bell Labs, giant of Bell Labs, uh, went on to MIT, but basically, literally invented information theory and was modest enough to call his seminal paper that established the field a theory of information, you know? And then I guess a few years later, people republished it in a volume, and other people wrote accompanying papers, and then they called the paper the theory of information.
Yeah, not yeah,
So,
exactly.
because he was too modest to call it the theory of information, he just called it a theory of information. So, anyway, so Claude Shannon, uh, A Mind at Play: How Claude Shannon Invented the Information Age. And I do have one article which I will link to, just came out in the Harvard Business Review by my friend Andrew Burt, How to
Oh,
Prepare
nice.
Your Company for AI Incidents. Very important topic for next year.
Very
And you,
nice.
Paco, recommendation.
Recommendations. Yeah. So, I mean, one is if you haven't seen it, there's a service called Fathom.video. And I really love this because, I mean, we've been using it in our teams. The idea is that you get transcription off of a conversation in a video call, but then you get summarization. And the summarization will typically have what are the key takeaways, who's going to do what with names and like to-dos. And I've been in this experience multiple times where a couple of really smart people will have a conversation for a half hour about what they're planning to do. And then you see the summary and it's like 6 bullet points, right? We just spent a half hour when we could have had 6 bullet points in email. So it's I think, a really nice way to accelerate this process of having remote meetings, but also just capturing what it is we're actually doing.
So
So that's
this is like Gong. Gong.io was doing this for sales, right? So
Yeah, this is
yeah.
more just for general video calls. What I would like to see is any video being summarized this way. Like you go and do a talk at Pi Data Global and you've done a 40-minute talk and like here's a summary of it. They don't really have that kind of service yet.
So then I can just record my talk in advance at
Yeah,
home and then
yeah,
send you the bullet points.
yeah, there you go. Speaking of multimodal, so that's one. The other one is you were recommending books. I'm going to recommend a book that I absolutely love. It's a kind of a bit out of the ordinary of what we'd say, but it's called The Flavor Thesaurus. And so the idea is about food pairings. So if you know a little bit about me, in my earlier life, I was in the military. Before that, I worked in restaurants. I still do a lot of cooking. And actually, I do a lot of work with knowledge graphs. And you may have noticed that my tutorials oftentimes will involve working with recipes or some aspect of cooking because it's usually a very connected data kind of problem. And that's exactly what the flavor thesaurus is. It's basically if you ever did the thing when you were a kid of just grabbing a thesaurus or an encyclopedia and flipping through and then going from one reference to the other, that's exactly how you use it. So there's a lot of charm and wit that the author has encoded in this. So
So
I
it's
definitely
not for experts.
uh no, I mean you don't have to be a professional cook. This is like anybody cooking at home. It's ideas of basically how to pivot on a recipe. So if you think of the structure of a recipe and what pairs with what, like, do you use blue cheese along with pears? And if you don't have blue cheese, what do you use instead? And maybe some kinds of flavor pairings that work brilliantly that chefs know about, but most people would never really think about or try, like white chocolate and pineapple or passion fruit.
So would you consider this a good holiday gift for someone interested in?
Yeah. Anybody interested in cooking, I would definitely highly recommend. So just I wanted to share something personal there, but I think there's also a knowledge graph aspect to this. So you'll probably see some graph AI models being based on this sooner than later.
Very cool. And with that, happy holidays and
Yeah, let's
happy New Year to all our listeners. And we'll catch you again in January.
see you all.